not a lot of the big cities. A lot of people are facing rising rents, rents that are too high for a lot of people to be able to afford, even people who have what were considered decent paying jobs. Now, one of them is teachers. Now, specifically teachers in Florida. Now, they only make about $43,000 a year. That's not a lot considering how much housing actually costs in the Miami area. It's actually very expensive because land is at a premium there. Now, lawmakers in this area now have what they believe is a solution. We're going to make school home. Wait. Okay, what does that mean? A preliminary proposal includes constructing a new mid-rise middle school with a floor devoted to residential units and several more reserved for parking and having classrooms on top. So teachers would have these apartments that are literally at school. And they say this is the solution for rising rents. Fascinating. Now, Miami-Dade is already in talks with Housing and Urban Development, the federal agency that oversees some of the country's affordable housing projects. J.P. Morgan, which we all know, giant bank, gave a $215,000 grant to the nonprofit Miami Homes for All to help develop what is called the Wheatley Plan. Now, this plan, as I said, would create this apartment complex / school all in one building. Now, of course, they go in and they explain how this is not going to actually be a place where students and faculty and people who live in the complex will be able to run into each other. Oh, no, we're going to have separate entrances to the school, separate entrances to the apartment complex, and nobody's going to mix on school hours. Well, that's lovely. But to me, there seems to be some problems with this. Again, private investment is one of them. So here you have a private corporation that's possibly going to get some public money to build these apartment complexes. And the other part is you're not actually solving the issue of affordable housing. That's the problem. Okay. Nonetheless, according to a March 22nd release, county teachers would get priority for these apartments, but the school system doesn't plan to reserve units for faculties at the schools involved. Still, the apartments would most likely be in demand for those teachers, given the non-existent commute. Jamie Torrens, the school system chief facilities officer, says, quote, "You basically just walk a corner and you're there. Well, look at that. See, you can save money on your commute. You save money on all this stuff, and we can avoid paying you." And again, that is the problem here. Now, look, as I said, teachers are not paid what they're worth, what they're earned. In fact, when apartment lists last year matched teacher salaries with rents in 50 of the country's largest real estate markets, Miami ranked 47th. Only New York, Seattle, and San Francisco had larger gaps, with the first-year teacher earning about $42,000 and raises coming very slowly. Apartment lists found even established teachers could expect to spend as much as 2/3 of their income on a 2-bedroom apartment in Miami. In fact, Ned Murray, Associate Director of the Florida International University's Metropolitan Center, which studies the gap between income and housing in Miami, he says, quote, "When you look at teacher salaries, it's just impossible for them to get into the housing market." He also says using school property to create housing for the school system's workforce is a good idea because land is such a difficult piece of the puzzle. Now, look, again, a lot of this has to do with land premium, land being at a premium, but also I think private developers that come in and they raise the rents, and when rich people come into the area, of course. Now, look, rich people in an area helps the school system because obviously property taxes, but that's a stupid system. We need to eliminate that system, get away from that system of funding property taxes. Everybody should get basically the same kind of amount or a reasonable amount for their school so that all schools are the same, are funded just as well. And look, I would also argue to get rid of charter schools. Now, why is that? Get rid of charter and private schools. Why? Because, well, look, rich people don't go to those normal schools. If they did, then they would actually invest more into those public schools. And that way, everybody could get a quality education like we were supposed to when the entire idea of a public school system was conceived. That creates more opportunity for everybody in school. Even the rich kids will have the same opportunity as well as the poor kids. Wouldn't that be amazing? Everybody starts off on equal footing with a good education. Okay. Now, though, of course, there are some that'll disagree with that. Nonetheless, the solution here, I think, for this, and look, I think there's probably more than one solution. We got to do something, of course, to bring down housing prices. But one solution for the teachers would be to actually pay them more. I know, that's crazy, right? I mean, look, it's not like they don't have the money to pay them. And let me give you an example. Florida has money to arm the teachers, but not to pay them more. In fact, they recently just passed a bill that appropriates $67 million towards arming teachers themselves. Now, the state would cover the cost of background checks, drug testing, psychological exams, and 132 hours of training. And it provides a one-time $500 stipend for those teachers who volunteer to have a gun and hold it in the classroom. Now, the bill also calls for spending $400 million to put a school resource officer in every single school, improve mental health counseling, and make public school buildings safer. Okay, look, I guess all that's well and good, except I don't agree with arming teachers. I think putting more guns in schools is a terrible idea. It's not as if having armed school resource officers has ever deterred anybody from shooting a school. I think the recent shooting in Parkland that had a school resource officer that was armed, that was not a deterrent to Nicholas Cruz, who actually went there to that school, knew there was a resource officer, knew he was armed, and didn't care. But anyway, we have all this money to arm teachers and do school resource officers to quote-unquote harden our schools, but we don't have the money to pay teachers more so they can actually afford to live. And instead, we're coming up with public-private partnerships in order to build apartment buildings in the schools. You know who else builds apartments in places of employment? China. You go to some of those factories, for example, I remember talking about Foxconn, which has, the suicide nets. Aside from the suicide nets, they also have dormitories that are filled with people. They live where they work. That's pretty messed up. And unfortunately, Miami, they think that doing this, making people live where they work or allowing them to live where they work in these apartments will actually help solve the problem, but it actually doesn't solve the problem. The problem is we don't pay teachers enough. We don't pay people enough. And we allow housing prices to get out of control. And we've got to do something about those problems if we actually want to solve the real issue behind this, instead of just allowing companies to capitalize on what is an actual major problem. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.